Undercover CEO Millionaire found a new waitress, sleeping in the restaurant booth after work. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The restaurant was quiet after midnight. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock filled the air. Tables were wiped down, chairs stacked, and the last bit of light flickered above booth number 7. That's where she was, Mia, the newest waitress, barely 23, curled up on the seat she'd been cleaning an hour ago. Her head rested on her arm, her apron still on, her shoes still tied. The day had drained every drop of strength she had left. Beside her lay an old spiral notebook stained with coffee, its pages covered in rushed handwriting and a folded medical bill tucked between them. She had promised her mom she'd send money by the end of the week. Now, with tips barely enough for gas and a few instant noodles, she had simply stopped fighting sleep. In the kitchen, the dishwasher hummed, and a man in a faded gray cap turned off the sink. To everyone at the restaurant, he was Eli, the quiet temp worker filling in while the regular line cook was on leave. No one suspected he was Ethan Cole, CEO of Cole Hospitality Group, the very company that owned this restaurant chain. He had been undercover for 2 weeks, trying to understand why his employees looked so weary, why turnover was so high, and why kindness had vanished from the service floor. But tonight, as he stepped out to turn off the lights, he froze. There, under the warm amber glow, was the young waitress, fast asleep in the booth. Her hand still clutched a pen, her knuckles pale, her face streaked with exhaustion. Ethan hesitated. He could have woken her gently, could have told her to go home. But something stopped him. He noticed the corner of a page poking out from the notebook. He glanced down, not to pry, but because the ink caught the light. On it, in looping handwriting, she had written, "Keep trying. Mom needs her meds. Don't quit tonight." Ethan stood there, the words echoing in his chest. For a long moment, he just watched her, the way her breathing steadied, the small tremor in her fingers, the evidence of a fight no one else saw. A quiet storm of humility swept through him. This was why he'd gone undercover, to see what couldn't be written in reports. He slowly draped his own jacket over her shoulders, the one he wore to blend in, smelling faintly of soap and smoke from the kitchen grill. "Get some rest," he whispered, barely audible. "You've earned it." Then he turned off the last light and walked into the cool night. The neon sign outside buzzing above him. Asterisk Crescent Diner. Open 24 hours. Asterisk. As he stepped onto the empty sidewalk, Ethan realized something had shifted. The experiment was no longer about management or morale. It had just become about one exhausted girl asleep in a booth, and the truth, she didn't even know she was teaching him yet. The next morning, sunlight poured through the diner's front windows, catching the dust that drifted lazily in the air. Mia woke with a start, realizing where she was. The booth under her cheek felt warm, and a soft jacket had been draped over her shoulders. She blinked, confused. It was not hers. The faint smell of soap and coffee lingered on it. Someone must have found her sleeping there. Her heart raced. Had the manager seen her? Would she be fired on her second week? She folded the jacket neatly and looked around. The place was empty, except for the hum of the fridge and the faint smell of bacon grease in the air. On the counter, she spotted a single sticky note written in clean block handwriting. "Get some rest next time, kid. No one can pour from an empty cup." She smiled, faintly touched, even though she had no idea who wrote it. Probably one of the cooks. She would thank them later. She grabbed her bag and ran to clock out before anyone else arrived. Across town, Ethan sat in his car outside corporate headquarters, his disguise gone. The crisp white shirt and silver watch on his wrist felt heavier than usual. He glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror, remembering the girl asleep in the booth. He had seen hundreds of employees, countless faces over the years, but something about hers stuck. Maybe it was the quiet determination even in exhaustion. Maybe it was the way she had written to herself, as if she was her own coach. He had built his empire believing efficiency solved everything. Last night proved he had been blind. Inside his office, the board was already waiting. Numbers, reports, profit margins. Ethan's assistant handed him a tablet with the quarterly review. He signed the reports, his mind elsewhere. For the first time in years, the metrics did not matter. That night, back at the diner, Mia worked the late shift again. Her feet ached, her eyes burned, but she kept smiling. The Friday rush had left stacks of plates and half-drunk coffee cups scattered across the counter. Near closing time, a familiar figure in a gray hoodie stepped in. She recognized him instantly, the quiet temp worker, Eli. He gave her a small nod and sat at the counter. "Coffee?" she asked, voice soft. "Black," he said. His voice was calm, deeper than she remembered. "Rough night?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "You could say that." "And you?" She laughed quietly. "Same. I think the night shift is trying to kill me." He chuckled, and for a brief second, the exhaustion in both of them turned into something lighter. As she poured his coffee, he noticed the notebook tucked behind the register, the same one from last night. She had taped the ripped corner back together. "You write a lot," he said. "Helps me breathe," she replied. "It is silly, I know." "Not silly at all," he said. "Sometimes the words we write to survive are the most honest ones." Mia looked at him, a little surprised at the thoughtfulness in his tone. He was supposed to be a temp cook, yet he spoke like someone who had lived 100 lives. Before she could reply, the manager's voice called out from the back, asking her to wipe down the booths. "Duty calls," she said, smiling tiredly. He watched her walk away, her ponytail swaying, her steps dragging just a little. He took a sip of his coffee, then pulled out his phone. On the screen, an unread email blinked. "Tomorrow, Carter Foundation Board meeting." He stared at it for a long second before sliding the phone face down on the counter. Right now, he was not a CEO. Not tonight. He was just Eli, and the diner was quiet, and the waitress who had fallen asleep in booth number 7 was teaching him more about leadership than any business seminar ever could. By the end of that week, the diner felt different. The usual chatter of customers and clinking of plates was still there. But beneath it lingered something quieter, something like hope. Mia was starting to smile again, not because life had gotten easier, but because of small moments that made it bearable. A free slice of pie from a kind customer. The soft thank you from a truck driver on his way through town. And, of course, Eli, the quiet cook who somehow always ended up staying late just to help her clean. That night, the clock struck 11:30, and the last customer left. Mia began stacking plates while Eli wiped down the grill. "You do not have to stay," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Your shift ended an hour ago." He shrugged, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Maybe I just like the quiet after hours." She laughed softly. "You are the only person I know who likes the sound of a fridge more than sleep." "Maybe sleep is overrated," he said. She smiled, but her eyes betrayed the exhaustion she carried. After a while, she sat down at the booth and rubbed her temples. Eli noticed her hand trembling slightly. "You okay?" he asked. "Just tired," she murmured. "Double shifts this week. My mom's meds went up again. Rent's due Monday. I will figure it out somehow." She smiled as if saying it would make it true. Ethan felt something twist inside him. He wanted to tell her right then who he really was, what he could do, but he knew it would ruin everything. For once, he wanted to understand her world before trying to fix it. "You know," he said gently, "sometimes people who carry too much forget they are allowed to rest." She gave him a look somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. "Rest does not pay bills, Eli." He nodded slowly. "Maybe not, but it keeps you alive long enough to try again." She laughed softly. "You talk like a preacher." "Nah," he said with a faint grin. "Just someone who has seen too many people forget what they are worth." The words hung in the air. Then, before either could say more, the manager called from the office that he was leaving early and asked Mia to lock up. She agreed, then turned to Eli. "You can go. I will finish up here." "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "Go home. You look like you need rest, too." He smiled but did not move right away. Instead, he pulled a folded bill from his pocket and set it under the tip jar. "For the kindness tax," he said. She rolled her eyes. That is not a real thing. It should be, he replied. You earn it every night. When he left, she found the bill and sighed. It was $20. She tucked it carefully inside her notebook, the one with the coffee stain. Outside, Ethan walked toward his car parked across the street. He turned once to look through the window. Mia was wiping the counter, humming softly, unaware that the man she thought was a temporary cook owned the very place she worked her heart out in. The sight humbled him. He had spent years hiding behind glass offices and press conferences. But here, in this simple diner, with a girl who had nothing yet gave everything, he finally saw the truth of what leadership should mean. The next morning, he was back in his executive chair at Cole Hospitality, a world of marble floors and quiet efficiency. His assistant asked if he would attend the gala dinner next week for the Carter Foundation. He hesitated, then nodded. Make sure the Crescent Diner staff get an invite to cater the event, he said. All of them? The entire diner? She asked, surprised. Yes, he said with a faint smile. They have no idea how important they are. And as he leaned back in his chair, the image of Mia's tired smile filled his mind like sunlight through a dirty window. Something was about to change. And for once, it was not about business, it was about doing what was right. The night of the gala arrived like a dream no one expected. The Crescent Diner staff had been buzzing all week, still half convinced it was a mix-up. The Carter Foundation, the biggest corporate charity event of the year, had chosen them a small-town diner to handle the catering. For Mia, it felt unreal. She had never been inside a ballroom before, let alone served one. She pressed her only clean shirt, tied her hair neatly, and reminded herself not to stare at the chandeliers. When they arrived, the venue sparkled like another world. Crystal glasses, white linen, soft music drifting from a string quartet. It was everything she had only seen in magazines. The team set up the buffet tables, guided by the event coordinators, who looked half amused at the sight of diner staff carrying trays of gourmet appetizers. Mia focused on her work, careful and quiet. She had learned to move unnoticed, but when she turned toward the stage, her heart skipped. There, under the spotlight, was Eli, or rather, Ethan Cole. He was not wearing the gray hoodie tonight. He was in a tailored black suit, crisp white shirt, speaking into a microphone like he belonged there. The logo behind him read, Cole Hospitality Group. The room applauded as he began, his voice calm, confident, and nothing like the man who scrubbed grills beside her. Mia's pulse raced. Her tray trembled. For a moment, she thought she was hallucinating. But no, the same dark eyes, the same quiet expression, only sharper now, framed by power. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, tonight is not about wealth. It is about people who keep our world turning, the ones we rarely see. His words blurred in her ears. All she could hear was the thud of her own heart. The tray slipped from her hand, plates crashing against the marble floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She froze, eyes wide. Ethan turned instantly, saw her, and for a second, the entire room fell away. Recognition hit both of them like lightning. He took a step toward her, but she backed away, cheeks burning. Mia, he started, but she turned and ran toward the side exit, the sound of broken porcelain echoing behind her. Outside, the cold air hit her face. She leaned against the wall, breathing hard. He lied, she whispered to herself, tears pricking her eyes. All this time he lied. Footsteps approached. Ethan emerged from the doorway, no longer the calm CEO, but the man she had known, the man who stayed late to help her clean tables. Mia, please listen, he said, voice low, steady. I never meant to deceive you. Never meant to, she snapped. You watched me struggle, Eli, Ethan, whatever your name is. You let me talk about my life, about my mom, and you said nothing. You let me think you were like me. Because I wanted to be, he said quietly. I wanted to remember what that felt like to earn trust, not buy it. Congratulations, she said bitterly. You got your lesson. Now you can go back to your perfect world. She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist, not to stop her, just enough to make her pause. You showed me what real kindness looks like, he said. It is not about charity or money. It is about humanity. You reminded me of that. Her eyes filled, not with anger now, but confusion. Then why do I feel like the fool in your story? You are not, he said softly. You are the reason I am trying to change the ending. She pulled her hand free and walked away, leaving him standing alone under the glittering lights of the gala, surrounded by applause that suddenly felt empty. As the doors closed behind her, Ethan looked at the shattered plate still lying near the stage. It was a mess, imperfect, but somehow it felt like the most honest thing in the entire room. For the next few days, Mia avoided the diner altogether. Every time her phone buzzed with an unknown number, she ignored it. She could not bear to hear his voice, not when every word from him now felt like a half-truth wrapped in charm. The night of the gala replayed in her mind over and over, each time with sharper humiliation. She had trusted him, talked to him, even admired him, and the whole time he had been watching her through a mask. Rent came due on Monday, and she barely had enough to cover half. Her mother's medication bill was still unpaid, and the landlord's patience was running out. She picked up double shifts at a small coffee shop across town, trying to lose herself in the rhythm of wiping tables and pouring lattes. But no matter how hard she tried, she could not shake the memory of his voice saying, "You reminded me of humanity." Across the city, Ethan sat in his office long after sunset. The skyline of downtown glowed behind him, but his mind was back at the diner. The gala had raised millions for charity, yet it felt hollow. Every applause sounded like guilt. He had built a company that measured success by revenue, not by the people behind it. Now he could not stop thinking about a waitress who had fallen asleep in a booth because she worked herself to exhaustion. He pulled a file from his drawer, a folder labeled The Kindness Project. It was an idea he had drafted months ago, an outreach program meant to support small communities, but it had never gone beyond paper. Until now, he added a name to the cover page: Director of Operations, Mia Thompson. 2 weeks later, a plain white envelope arrived at the coffee shop where Mia worked. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, embossed with the Cole Foundation's logo. Her first instinct was to throw it away. But curiosity got the better of her. The letter read, "Miss Thompson, we would like to formally invite you to interview for a leadership role at the Kindness Project. Your work ethic and compassion have been personally recommended by Mr. Ethan Cole." Her hands trembled. It felt like a trick, another test she did not ask for. But deep down, something told her it was real. She stared at the bottom of the letter. There was a handwritten note in blue ink. "You once said kindness is free. I am finally ready to prove you were right." The words made her chest tighten. Against her better judgment, she decided to go. The next morning, she arrived at the Foundation's headquarters, a renovated warehouse turned community hub filled with volunteers packing food boxes and sorting donated clothes. It was nothing like the sterile corporate offices she had imagined. And there he was, standing near the entrance. No suit this time, just jeans and a rolled-up shirt, sleeves dusted with flour from a donation drive bake sale. "You came," he said quietly. "I did," she replied, her tone guarded. "If this is another social experiment, tell me now." "It is not," he said. "This is yours, as much as mine. You inspired it." He showed her the plans, the logo, the program details, all built around one simple mission: feeding, training, and employing people from struggling neighborhoods. The diner staff were already part of the pilot team. "You cannot fix what you do not understand," Ethan said, looking at her. "But you help me understand." Mia looked around at the volunteers, laughing, the smell of coffee and bread filling the space. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something she had almost lost hope. Still, she crossed her arms. "I do not forgive you," she said softly. "Not yet. I am not asking for forgiveness," he replied. "I am asking for a chance to make it mean something." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "One chance," she said. He smiled, not triumphant, but grateful, as if the word itself was a gift. And as they stood among boxes of donations and echoes of laughter, the world between them began, slowly, to rebuild itself. Months passed, and the Kindness Project began to grow faster than anyone expected. What started as a single community kitchen expanded into food drives, job training, and small business grants across the city. Mia threw herself into the work, managing volunteers, keeping budgets balanced, and visiting every site personally. She worked long hours, but for the first time, her exhaustion felt meaningful. She was not just surviving anymore, she was building something that mattered. Ethan kept his distance at first, letting her lead. He would show up quietly, help unload boxes, talk with families, and then leave before the cameras arrived. Every time their paths crossed, their conversations were short, cautious, but there was a rhythm forming again, one built on respect rather than apology. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the skyline, Mia found him repairing a broken shelf in the storage room. He had a smudge of paint on his cheek, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow. She leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "You really cannot stay away from manual labor, can you?" she teased. He looked up, smiling. "It helps me think. Besides, it keeps me from giving more useless speeches." She laughed softly. "You were not that bad, just a little too polished." "And you were too honest," he replied, meeting her eyes. "You said what everyone else was afraid to say." She tilted her head. "Like what? That kindness only means something when it costs you something." He paused, setting down the wrench. "You were right. I spent years donating money and calling it generosity. But it was just convenience. You gave more with $10 than I ever did with $1 million. Her throat tightened. There was sincerity in his voice that left no room for pride. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, volunteers' laughter echoed through the open windows. Finally, she said, "You really remember that night, do you?" "Every second of it," he said. A girl asleep in a booth, holding on to hope like it was the last thing she owned. Mia's eyes softened. "That girl is still trying to keep the lights on, you know." "Then let me help," he said. "Not as a CEO, as someone who cares." The words hung between them like fragile glass. She wanted to believe him, but the old fear still lingered, the fear of trusting too soon. Before she could reply, her phone buzzed. It was the hospital. Her mother's condition had worsened. Without a word, she grabbed her bag and ran out. Ethan followed her to the parking lot. "I am driving," he said. She tried to protest, but he had already opened the passenger door. They drove through the evening traffic in silence. The hospital lights flickered in the distance as Mia whispered prayers under her breath. When they arrived, she ran inside, and he waited outside the room while doctors worked. Hours later, she stepped out, eyes red but calm. "She is stable," she said quietly. "They said we got here in time." Ethan exhaled, relief washing over his face. "Good," he said. "That is good." She looked at him, her walls slowly lowering. "Thank you," she whispered. "You did not have to come." "I know," he replied softly. "But I wanted to." It was the first time she smiled at him without bitterness since the gala. As dawn began to break outside the hospital window, Ethan handed her a coffee from the vending machine and sat beside her in the waiting area. Neither spoke for a while, but their silence felt different now, not heavy, but peaceful. For the first time, it felt like the distance between them was not built on lies anymore, but on the slow, fragile work of rebuilding trust. The kind that does not announce itself, it just grows quietly, like sunlight finding its way through clouds. Weeks after that long night at the hospital, things began to change in ways Mia never expected. Her mother's health stabilized, and the foundation approved her treatment plan through the Kindness Project's Medical Assistance Fund. Every time Mia tried to thank Ethan, he brushed it off, insisting it was the team's decision, not his. But she knew better. He had a way of helping quietly, like he wanted the good to happen, without the world knowing his hand was behind it. Their work brought them together more often, meetings, site visits, late-night planning sessions, and though they never talked about the past, something unspoken began to mend between them. One evening, after a long day distributing food boxes in the rain, they found themselves sitting in the empty community hall, drying off with paper towels and leftover coffee. Mia laughed when she saw the streak of mud on Ethan's shirt. "You look more like a volunteer than a CEO now," she said. He grinned. "That is the idea. It feels better than wearing a suit." "You say that now," she teased. "Wait until tomorrow when the board complains about your shoes." He looked down at his sneakers, soaked and scuffed. "They will live," he said. "For once, I feel like I am actually earning what I have." The words hung in the air, quiet but powerful. For a moment, neither moved. The hum of the old heater filled the silence, and Mia found herself watching him differently, not as the man who had lied to her, but as someone who was learning, step by step, to be honest in ways that mattered. "Ethan," she said softly, "why did you really start this project?" "The truth." He leaned back in his chair, eyes thoughtful. "Because I was tired," he admitted. "Tired of signing checks and calling it compassion. Tired of living behind a name that did not mean anything anymore. You showed me something that night in the diner. You gave when you had nothing. I realized I had everything and gave nothing real." She looked at him, the sharp edges of anger melting into something she could not name. "You know," she said, "you are still making it sound like a redemption story." "Maybe it is," he said. "But it is not mine alone. It is ours." She shook her head but smiled despite herself. "You really do not quit, do you?" "Not when it comes to things worth fixing," he replied. She was about to answer when her phone buzzed. It was a text from the board reminding her about the upcoming charity dinner, an event that would feature the Kindness Project for the first time in front of investors and the press. "We are presenting next week," she said, showing him the message. "I know," he replied. "I want you to lead it." Her eyes widened. "Me? No, Ethan, that is your job. I am not—" "You are exactly the person who should," he interrupted. "You built this with your hands, not with money. They need to see that." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "But if I trip over my own speech, I am blaming you." He laughed. "Deal." That night, as she walked home under the drizzle, Mia felt something she had not felt in years, a sense of belonging. For the first time, her life was not a series of struggles, but a story with purpose. She still did not fully trust him. Not yet. But she could feel that he was trying. Truly trying. And maybe that was enough for now. Across town, Ethan stood by the window of his office, watching the city lights shimmer against the rain. For the first time in his life, he did not see profits or properties or power. He saw faces. He saw her. And quietly, he promised himself that the next chapter would not just be about building an empire, but about earning forgiveness, one act of kindness at a time. The night of the charity dinner arrived, and the atmosphere inside the grand hall felt electric. The Kindness Project banners hung across the stage, the same words printed on them that Mia had once scribbled in her coffee-stained notebook. "Kindness is free." She stood backstage, clutching a stack of note cards she knew she would never look at. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what this moment meant. Just a few months ago, she had been a tired waitress trying to keep her head above water. Now, she was about to speak to hundreds of people, investors, executives, reporters, all waiting to hear her story. Ethan stood a few steps away, adjusting his tie, though his eyes never left her. "You are going to do great," he said quietly. "Just speak from your heart. That is what they came for." She smiled nervously. "Easy for you to say. You have done this 1,000 times. And every time I said too much," he admitted. "So tonight, it is your turn." When the lights dimmed, the host called her name. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The crowd fading into silence. For a moment, she simply looked out at the sea of faces and took a breath. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm but steady. "A few months ago, I was serving coffee at a diner that stayed open 24 hours. I worked until I fell asleep in one of the booths, not knowing that someone was watching, not out of pity, but out of understanding. That moment changed everything." A murmur rippled through the audience. She continued, "The Kindness Project started because someone decided that compassion should not be an afterthought in business. It should be the foundation. We are not here to hand out charity. We are here to give people the dignity to stand again." She paused, her eyes finding Ethan in the crowd. He gave a small nod, one of quiet encouragement. "I learned something working those long nights," she said. "That kindness does not need a camera or a headline. It just needs a heart willing to notice. And tonight, I am asking you to notice." When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Not polite applause, but the kind that carried gratitude and admiration. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and somewhere in the back, a few investors stood to clap. Ethan watched from the crowd, his chest tight with pride. He had given countless speeches about success, but none of them had ever moved people like this. After the event, reporters surrounded Mia, eager to ask questions. She answered each one humbly, deflecting attention away from herself and back to the volunteers. When the crowd thinned, she finally found Ethan waiting by the exit. "You did it," he said softly. "No," she replied, shaking her head. "We did." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the warm glow of the chandelier above. "You know that speech. It was better than anything I have ever written." "That is because it was real," she said. "You cannot fake that." They walked out into the crisp night air, the noise of the gala fading behind them. The city lights shimmered across the water, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Ethan said quietly, "Mia, there is something I have been meaning to tell you." She turned toward him, heart beating faster. "This project, it is not just a company initiative to me. It is my second chance. You gave me that, even when you had every reason not to." She smiled faintly, the wind brushing her hair across her face. "You did not need a second chance, Ethan. You just needed to remember who you are." He took a small step closer, not crossing any lines, just enough to show he meant every word that came next. "Then maybe you are who I want to remember it with." She held his gaze for a long moment, neither agreeing nor denying, only letting the silence answer for her. Somewhere in the distance, the city kept moving, but for them, time slowed. And for the first time since that night in the diner, the wait between them no longer felt like regret, it felt like possibility. 1 year later, the diner that had once been a quiet place for night shift workers and weary travelers looked completely different. The neon sign still flickered above the door, but now it read, "Crescent Diner, Home of the Kindness Project." Inside, laughter filled the air, the smell of fresh coffee and pancakes mixing with the sound of clinking plates. A photo wall displayed snapshots of volunteers, smiling families, and the very first newspaper article that had told their story. Mia stood by the counter, refilling a cup for an elderly woman who came in every morning. Her hands were steady now, confident, and her eyes shone with quiet pride. She no longer wore the old apron that once felt like armor. Instead, she wore a simple pin that read, "Director of Operations." The doorbell jingled, and she looked up to see Ethan stepping inside, carrying a small bouquet of daisies and his usual, almost shy smile. "You are late," she teased. "I know," he said, "but I brought peace offerings." She laughed, taking the flowers. "You always do." They sat at their favorite booth, the same one where she had once fallen asleep, the same one where everything had quietly begun. The sunlight hit the window just right, casting golden patterns on the table. "I cannot believe it has been a year," she said, stirring her coffee. "Feels like yesterday you were pretending to be a cook." "And burning half the food," he said, smiling. "Yes, I remember. You almost set the fryer on fire." "Almost?" he said. "But it worked out, did it not?" She nodded, her gaze softening. "It did, more than either of us imagined." Outside, volunteers carried boxes into a van painted with the Kindness Project logo. The world had started to take notice. Their model was spreading to other cities, now community kitchens, education funds, small business grants, all built on one idea that began with a tired waitress and an undercover millionaire. Ethan watched her as she spoke with the volunteers, the warmth in her voice, the way people gravitated toward her. He realized she had become the heart of everything they built. When she turned back to him, she caught him staring. "What?" she asked with a playful smile. "Just thinking," he said quietly, "about how a single act of kindness can change a life, maybe two." "You still talk like a man giving speeches," she said, shaking her head. "Old habits," he replied. Then, after a pause, he reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, a worn notebook, its cover faintly stained with coffee. Her eyes widened. "You kept it?" "Of course," he said. "This started everything. You wrote down your dreams in here. I figured we should add one more." He opened the notebook to the last page. In his handwriting it read, "Kindness is free, love is too. Will you marry me?" For a moment, the diner fell silent in her mind. The noise faded, and all she could hear was the soft thud of her heart. She looked up at him, stunned. "Ethan," he smiled gently. No gala, no cameras, no grand speeches, just us. What do you say? Tears welled in her eyes as she covered her mouth with her hand. Then she nodded, laughing through the tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course. The room erupted in applause from the staff who had been watching from behind the counter. Someone cheered, someone cried, and Mia just laughed, half embarrassed, half overjoyed. Ethan slid the simple silver ring onto her finger, the same one he had bought months ago but had waited for the right moment to give. You really do not quit, she said, wiping her tears. Not when it comes to things worth fighting for, he replied. They sat together, hands intertwined, as the morning light poured through the windows of the diner. Outside, a delivery truck passed with the Kindness Project logo painted across its side, carrying food, hope, and the story of two people who had proven that kindness could build empires and that love, when honest, could rebuild hearts. It had all started with a tired girl, asleep in a booth, and a stranger who decided to care. And that, they both knew, was the best mistake the world could ever give them. This heartwarming tale is one of the most touching Millionaire stories about redemption, kindness, and unexpected love. It follows Mia, a struggling waitress, and Ethan, a CEO who goes undercover and discovers that true wealth lies in compassion, not status. From a late-night diner to a global charity, their journey proves that generosity can rewrite destinies. This story captures the essence of Millionaire stories that inspire hope and humanity, reminding us that even a simple act of kindness can transform lives. As Mia and Ethan build the Kindness Project together, their love becomes a symbol of second chances, making this one of the best Millionaire stories for anyone who believes that goodness never goes unnoticed. If you are searching for cinematic, emotional Millionaire stories that blend romance, moral depth, and real transformation, this is the one you will remember.